Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beginners Flamingo Stitch Along series. My name is Sarah. I'm a Royal School of Needlework trained tutor that loves sharing as many helpful hints and tips as I possibly can to help you on your embroidery journey. If you've been stitching along, then your flamingo should really be starting to take shape now, which is obviously lovely to see. We've already explored some basic foundational stitches and added a little bit of texture with our whipped and woven wheels. And today we're going to be building on that even more. If this is the first video in the series that you are seeing, then you'll want to go back to part 1, where we obviously start from the beginning, and I'll link that down below. In this video, we'll be learning open and closed fly stitch. These are both brilliant stitches for creating movement as they flow beautifully around curves within your design. So they're really a useful pair of stitches to have in your toolkit. Before we get started though, I wanted to let you know about a new class I'll be releasing in the next few days called Sunburst Crewel. It's a live online class where we'll dive a bit deeper into some really beautiful surface stitches, things like block shading, long and short, satin stitch, raised stem, burden stitch, and those are just a handful of stitches that we'll be looking at. There's so much more. It's perfect if you've got a little bit of embroidery experience and you're ready to develop your skills further. And the design is inspired by the orange and pink tones of my wedding bouquet. So it's super special to me and a design that I really love. I'll pop all the details in the description box below if you are interested and you would like to take a look. But for now though, let's get your hoop, thread up your needle, and let's get started with our fly stitches. So just a quick recap over what we've done in our previous 2 lessons. In our first lesson, we looked at chain stitch and detached chain. And in our second lesson, we looked at whipped wheels and we looked at woven wheels. In this lesson, we're going to look at open fly, which is going to be worked in here and here. And we're also going to look at closed fly, which is going to be worked in the beak section. So we're going to start by looking at the open fly stitch, and I'm going to work in this long section here and then in this smaller section here. And I'm going to use 2 strands of the orange, the 741, and I've threaded up a number 7 embroidery needle. So for the open fly stitch, we want to start at the base of each shape. So here for this one, and then here for this one. And I'm going to start the thread off on the central line. I could start it off on the outside lines, that would be fine. We're going to start by doing a stitch along the central line. Now this stitch will be about 4 to 5 millimeters in length, and that length will determine the spacing between each of the open fly stitches. I'm now going to bring up the needle up to the side. It doesn't matter which side, and I'm a couple of millimeters in from the edge of my design line, and I'm just below the very top of my stitch. I then want to take my needle down parallel with my first stitch that I've just created. And again, a millimeter, 2 millimeters away from the edge of the design line. And as we work up along the length of the section, our angle will turn, as you can see here. So it's always lying 90 degrees with the central design line. Now I'm going to bring the needle up at the end of my last stitch on the central design line, and I'm sharing the same hole, coming up through the loop and then pull down from the bottom and then up from the top, the same as we did with our chain stitch in the last video. And this helps to prevent wear and tear on the thread. Pull that nice and tight. And now I'm going to take the needle back down on the design line, again about 4 or 5 millimeters away, the same length as the first stitch I created. And the length of this stitch will determine the spacing between our fly stitches. So if you want them closer together, you can make this stitch that I'm about to do a little bit shorter. And if you want them further apart, you can make the stitch a little bit longer. But we're sticking around 5 millimeters. Now again, I'm going to bring my needle up on the left-hand side, millimetre or so away from the edge of the design line. And I'm coming up just below the top of my last stitch. And then down on the opposite side. Again, leave a little loop. And then up at the end of the last stitch on the central design line. Again, trying to share that same hole. Pull the thread down from underneath and up from the top. And then back down on the central design line. Now up on the left hand side. Again, I'm trying to keep that spacing consistent between my stitches. And I also want to make sure I keep the angle consistent as well. So it's coming up just below the top of that stitch. I don't want the angle to flatten out. I want it to stay the same. Down on the opposite side. Again, keeping the same distance from the outside design line, up on the central line, and back down on the central line. Again, you can see, making sure we say 90 degrees to the central design line. So we'll get a little bit further away on the right hand side, and the stitches will be a little bit closer together on the left hand side, and that will help turn the angle. Again, we're keeping everything 90 degrees with our central design line. And as we find we get closer to the end, obviously this shape narrows. So you'll find that your stitches will get just a little bit shorter in the center, and everything will get just a little bit closer together as you are working up to the point. Not massively shorter though, just a fraction. And that'll also help turn the tight curves. This will be my last stitch here, because once we've outlined it, and it's going to be outlined with a stem stitch, once that outline is worked, you won't see anything inside the design line. So we're going to look at closed fly stitch now, which is very similar to our open fly, which we have just done. And instead of leaving spaces between stitches, fabric gets fully covered, as does the design line. And we'll cut that knot away. And we're going to totally cover our design lines, and we're going to work in the 470 at the tip, which is the green. And then working from the tip to the base of the head, we're going to have the 741. Each one will be using 2 strands of the stranded cotton. So I've just started off 2 strands of my 470 because I'm going to start at the tip of the design. And as with the open fly, we're going to work a small stitch down the central design line. Now you can see I'm bringing my needle up just slightly beyond the point. And what that does is it helps to maintain a sharp point. If I was to bring it up on the design line, then we end up getting more of a rounded point and it doesn't look quite as nice. So always extending it just a little bit beyond the point. Now this first stitch is going to be 4 to 5 millimeters in length. That's about 5 millimeters I've got there. And that will help create our first angles. Now I'm going to bring the needle up on one side, and it doesn't matter what side, but I'm bringing it up really, really close to the first stitch that I put in at the point. By bringing it up nice and close, I'm going to get a nice sharp point. Let's just see if we can position that a bit better. So bring it up as we did for our open fly. And now I'm going to take it down on the opposite side of the point, but this time I'm going to angle my needle in towards the point. You can see it's running parallel with our design line, and I'm tucking it in nice and close. I don't want to bring it up far away like I've just positioned it there, because then I won't get a nice sharp point. So I'm always angling in towards that first stitch, tucking it in as close as I can, and the needle runs parallel. Now we create our little loop, bring our needle up at the end of the very first stitch on the central line. Don't forget we're sharing the same hole up through our little loop. Bring the thread down from the bottom, then up from the top, and again that helps to reduce wear and tear on the thread. And then we're going to take a very small stitch, again down on the central design line, to lock that little loop that we've just made in place. And by making those stitches nice and small, it means that we will maintain our angles and ensure that all of the fabric is covered as well as the design lines. So now I'm going to come up on the same side, again trying to get my needle nice and close to that previous stitch. Down on the right hand side, angling the needle at about 45 degrees to the fabric. And then again, we come up at the end of the last stitch, through our little loop of thread that we left, pull down from the bottom and then up from the top. And again, we take a small stitch down on our central design line. Now that small stitch is only about 1.5 mm in length. Any bigger and we'll end up with changing our angles and big gaps. Now I'm going to use a couple of strands of the 741 because I want to introduce the orange. I've only used a tiny little bit of green at the tip. If you wanted to use a little bit more, you absolutely can do. So I'll just finish that thread off. And now we'll have 2 strands of our 741, so the orange. I'm trying to start off in the middle of a shape, not on the design line or on the central design line, because then it gets in the way. And again, we'll bring the needle up on the left. I'm angling it out a little bit from underneath. And then again, tucking my needle in, nice and close. Leave a little loop. Up at the end of the last stitch, through the loop. Just cut our knot off. Pull down from the bottom and then up from the top. And take down a small little stitch on the design line. Now, as we move further away from the point, we won't have to angle our needle quite as much out from underneath or tuck it in quite as close. You can see there, I'm still close, but not quite as close as I was for the first few stitches. And that's really just to maintain a nice sharp point. Pull our thread through and then a small stitch down on the central line. And you should find as you work along the length that the angle flows with the shape and the angle should be maintained. But make sure you keep the length of that central stitch consistent and nice and short. You can see I'm not tucking it in quite as close there. A little bit more of a gap, but I'm still covering my design lines. We want to try and create a nice clean edge because this stitch doesn't get outlined. Now, if you don't get the neatest edge, of course, you could absolutely outline it with a split stitch if you wanted to, but we're aiming to not outline it. You want to keep that curve flowing along the length. So you might find you have to bring it up slightly further away on this left hand side and slightly closer together on the right hand side, just to help maintain the angle and make it flow smoothly. A little bit further away here than I have been doing previously. There's not a big gap. You can tuck it in a little bit closer down on that side. Again, not as close as the point. That'll help turn out angles so it flows smoothly with the curve. I'm going to carry on working up to the head now, exactly the same way. So this will be my last stitch as a complete stitch before I need to fill in these little sections. And you can see I've not altered the angle of my closed fly stitches to fit the end bit here. I've worked it as I should do, and now I've got two little sections either side to fill in. And this is just filled in by straight stitches. So bring the needle up on the outside and down on the inside. And I'm tucking it in a little bit when I take it down. You can fill in the same side and then do the other side or alternate, it's up to you. But I'm still coming up on the outside edge and down on the inside. And I'm trying to maintain the angle of these stitches as well. So I'm not taking that down too close there. We'll end up with a teeny tiny little stitch on the end. We might need one more after this, we'll see. Yeah, I think that's good. So now same on the other side. So again, up on the outside. And down on the inside. I'm not cutting in too close or angling my needle too close because I want to maintain my stitch angle that I've created. I'm coming up fairly close on the outside design line as well. And there we have it. That is our closed fly completed, and we can finish off the thread just in the head here with a couple of little holding stitches. So there we have our fly stitches. We've got open fly in this section here and this section here, and then we've got closed fly in this section here. And that's our open and closed fly stitch. These are such versatile stitches, and once you get the hang of the spacing and flying around the curves, they're really satisfying to use. As you add them into your flamingo, you'll start to see more shape and movement coming through, which is where the design really comes together. And if you're enjoying building your skills and want to take things a little further, don't forget the Sunburst Crewel work design that I mentioned at the start. And that's launching very soon. It's a lovely next step if you'd like to explore more detailed stitches and techniques in a live setting. And I'd absolutely love to see you there if you can join us. In the next video, we'll be adding even more detail to our flamingo in the form of stem and wheat ear stitch. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that next video. Don't forget you can download the pattern and stitch plan from my website if you haven't already. It's obviously a really helpful reference. And if you've enjoyed stitching along, I'd love it if you give this video a like and feel free to share your progress with me. I love seeing all of your work. Just tag me on Instagram at @wellembroidered so I can see it. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.